There is one man who was in that room. One man who sat across from Stanley Kubrick for 2 years while the most dangerous film in Hollywood history was being built frame by frame. One man who watched every scene get constructed. The mansion, the masks, the ceremony, the billionaire pulling strings in the dark, and then went completely suspiciously, deafeningly silent for the next 25 years. That man is Tom Cruise. And right now, with the Epstein files blowing open and the whole world finally catching up to what Kubrick was trying to say, Tom Cruise's silence is no longer just strange. It is a confession.
Know what is the one piece of material I would actually rather know at this point than the contents of the Epstein files is the 25 minutes that were cut from Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut.
Because here's what nobody is asking. Kubrick spent years embedding a documentary-level warning about elite abuse networks into that film. What did he tell his lead actor while they were making it?
Kept muttering to himself that the Warner Brothers executives were going to hate his film. And literally, he quoted me saying, "Oh, when they see this film, they're going to kill."
6 days later, Stanley Kubrick was dead. And Tom Cruise, the man who was on that set every single day, has never once explained what he knows. Until now, the world never thought to ask why.
So he took me to some Eyes Wide Shut party in the middle of the Hollywood Hills.
This is the connection they've been praying nobody makes. Let's establish something before we go any further. When people talk about Eyes Wide Shut, they talk about Kubrick. They talk about what he knew, what he researched, what he embedded in the film, and rightly so. But in every single one of those conversations, there is a glaring omission, a person-shaped hole in the story that nobody wants to look directly at. Tom Cruise was not a hired actor who showed up, hit his marks, and went home.
Kubrick didn't work that way.
This was a man so obsessive, so precise, so methodical in his craft that actors on his sets weren't just performing, they were being transformed. He didn't give people scripts and wave them off. He pulled them inside his research. He made them understand at a bone-deep level exactly what world they were depicting. His actors weren't just reading lines. They were being educated. So, ask yourself, what did Kubrick teach Tom Cruise about the world behind the masks? Because Kubrick spent years, not months, years researching the habits of the ultra-wealthy before a single frame of Eyes Wide Shut was ever shot. He went all the way down into the documented behavior of elite power circles, the secret gatherings hidden inside legitimate social events, the handlers, the gatekeepers, the rituals designed to bind powerful men together through shared guilt. He was the kind of filmmaker who would research a subject so deeply that he'd come out the other side knowing more than the actual expert. None of that knowledge stayed in Kubrick's head alone. It was shared. It was discussed on set. It was debated in production meetings. And Tom Cruise, sitting at the center of all of it as Dr. Bill Harford, the man who stumbles into the elite's hidden world and almost pays with his life, absorbed every single piece of it. And here's the thing about the character of Dr. Bill that nobody discusses in these conversations. Bill Harford isn't just a protagonist. He is a warning. Kubrick didn't cast Tom Cruise because he needed a bankable star. He cast Tom Cruise because Tom Cruise at that exact moment in his life and career was one of the most powerful, most connected, most deeply embedded men in Hollywood. He was inside the machine in a way most people never get to be. Kubrick cast the man who existed in the real world as Bill Harford so that the parallel between fiction and reality would be impossible to ignore for anyone paying close attention. He wasn't just making a movie about a man who stumbles into the elite's darkness. He was making a movie starring a man who lived inside the elite's world. And Tom Cruise has spent 25 years saying absolutely nothing about what he learned in that process. Think about the pattern of what happens to people who get close to this truth. Kubrick delivered his final cut and was dead within 6 days. His film was carved up in the editing room without his consent. 24 minutes of footage ripped out. The version the world received deliberately blunted.
He waited in the lobby, really kind of pale and distant. And then the movie ended and the door opened and somebody walked out and said, "Stanley, you need to come down here." And the door shut. And this guy said that he heard yelling for about 45 minutes, screaming and yelling. And he heard Kubrick say that, "You can't change my film. It's in my contract." And then Kubrick stormed out first and he followed Stanley. And that was the last time we ever saw Stanley.
Mel Gibson arrived in Hollywood, sensed something deeply wrong in the environment around him, and eventually put it on screen with Sound of Freedom. His career was systematically destroyed. The DUI, the leaked phone calls, the blacklisting, years of projects quietly dying. Corey Feldman went to the police in 1993 with names. He went on Barbara Walters and tried to say it on live television. He wrote books. He screamed into every microphone he could find for 3 decades. And every single time, the industry made sure nobody listened.
Saying that there are people that were the people that did this to both me and Corey that are still working, they're still out there, and they're some of the richest, most powerful people in this business.
And they
do not want me saying what I'm saying right now.
Joe Rogan attended a party hosted by one of Epstein's alleged associates, was directly approached by Epstein's team in 2017, said no, and then spent years being dragged through media hit piece after media hit piece. Platform controversies, deplatforming campaigns, endless attempts to destroy his credibility.
The files for not going because Jeffrey Epstein was trying to meet with me.
Oh, I did see that.
Yeah, and I was like, what?
I'm like, no thanks.
Yeah.
Aren't you glad?
Yeah, but I would have never went anyway. It's like, it's not even a possibility that I would ever went,
But
especially after I Googled them.
Now, here's the question. You need to sit with every single person connected to this story. The director, the actor who lived it in real life, the child star who experienced it firsthand, the podcaster who was recruited. Every single one of them either got destroyed, had their work mutilated, spent years being called crazy, or spent years being attacked by the same media ecosystem that protected these people. Except Tom Cruise. His career after Eyes Wide Shut. The Mission Impossible franchise became the biggest action series on the planet. Top Gun: Maverick became one of the highest-grossing films in Hollywood history. He is, as of right now, arguably more powerful and more commercially dominant than he has ever been. Now, there are 2 ways to read that. The first is that Tom Cruise is simply a talented, hardworking actor who transcended any controversy around the film. The second is far more uncomfortable. What if Tom Cruise's continued success, his untouchable status in an industry that destroys anyone who gets too close to the truth, is not despite his proximity to Eyes Wide Shut? What if it's because of what he knows and what he chose to do with that knowledge? What if the machine that obliterated Mel Gibson left Tom Cruise alone because Tom Cruise played a different game? To understand what Tom Cruise was witnessing on that set, you have to understand what Kubrick was actually building around him. Because Eyes Wide Shut wasn't a psychological thriller with some dark symbolism sprinkled in. It was a documentary in a costume. Every single structural element Kubrick embedded in that story maps directly with documentary precision onto the Epstein operation. Start with the entry point. In the film, Dr. Bill, Tom Cruise's character, gets pulled into the elite network through access granted by a trusted insider. The legitimacy of the first party. Ziegler's glamorous ball is used as a Trojan horse. The real gathering happens hidden behind it. Public face, private horror.
Listen, Bill, I don't think you realize what kind of trouble you were in last night. Who do you think those people were? Those were not just ordinary people there. If I told you their names, I'm not going to tell you their names, but if I did, I don't think you'd sleep so well.
That is not a movie line written for dramatic effect. That is a blueprint. And Kubrick wrote it by reverse engineering the real world. In the Epstein files, the entry mechanism is identical. Lavish, legitimate-seeming gatherings, respected names in attendance. The architecture of credibility used to lower people's defenses before the real agenda surfaces.
You have esteemed scientists, Nobel laureates, scholars, all these different world leaders, bankers, famous singers, famous actors, they're all there. So that's the way you get people to do it. You invite people to this immense, lavish celebration that with intellectual world leaders, geniuses. And you think, well, how could it be bad if all these geniuses are there?
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, you're doing yayo, and you got some girl from some Eastern Bloc country that's rubbing your and you don't know that she's 16, and she takes you in a room, and that room is filled with candy.
Kubrick showed that world to Tom Cruise every single day on set. He showed him the billionaire gatekeeper, the Ziegler character who was modeled on the real-world financier who operated as the ultimate fixer for the powerful. The man tasked with ensuring the appetites of the elite were met without consequence. The same man who would later turn out to be the literal architect of the largest blackmail and tracking operation in modern history. Tom Cruise spent 2 years filming scenes built around the anatomy of that operation. And then in 2026, the FBI officially labeled Les Wexner, founder of the retail empire, the man who gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney over $1 billion fortune, as a co-conspirator. Wexner's retail businesses were embedded in the operational framework of Epstein's network: Victoria's Secret, models, recruitment, access. Kubrick showed a costume shop where young women were commodified. Epst used a modeling empire to do the same thing in real life. Tom Cruise filmed those scenes. He stood inside that world. He heard Kubrick explain in exhaustive research-backed detail exactly what it all meant, and then he went silent. Joe Rogan has been circling this story his entire public life, without ever fully realizing he was a character in it. He attended the party in the Hollywood Hills Naomi Campbell's birthday. He stood in that room with names that would later appear in the Epstein files and felt exactly what Mel Gibson described when he first arrived in Hollywood. Something was off. The energy was wrong. These people existed in a different world than everyone else. He called it, in his own words, an eyes wide shut party.
He took me some eyes wide shut party in the middle of the Hollywood Hills. You had to get in an elevator and go to the top of this hill. What? Yeah, it was Naomi Campbell had this birthday party. And so Dave's like, "Hey Joe, you want to go with me to this party?" And I'm like, "Dude, I don't like going to those parties. I like avoiding celebrity things." He's like, "Oh, come on, man. I got to be back here by midnight anyway."
He was at the party. He was in Epstein's files for being approached and turning it down. He spent years on his podcast talking about Hollywood's dark side and Kubrick's suppressed film. And every single time, the media that had protected these networks for decades came after him with everything they had. But here's what changed when the Epstein files actually dropped. Rogan wasn't just replaying old conversations anymore. He was suddenly looking at the timeline from a completely different angle. Because now he had confirmation, documented, unsealed, government-verified confirmation that every single thing Kubrick put in that movie was real. The rituals, the gatekeepers, the billionaires, the international logistics of moving victims, the blackmail infrastructure built on shared guilt and recorded evidence. All of it confirmed. And that's the moment that left Rogan genuinely speechless.
There were a lot of people that had very cozy relationships with Epstein, whether they were involved in any of these alleged activities or not. But they don't even care, because it's appearances that get you in trouble. So you have to basically put as much distance between yourself and Epstein as you possibly can. And I think in order to do that, a lot of people end up lying about it.
Because when you look at the documented reality of Epstein's network laid against what Kubrick built frame by frame and eyes wide shut, and you realize Tom Cruise was standing inside that recreation of reality for 2 full years, the question stops being academic. What did Tom Cruise know? What did Kubrick tell him? And why, of all the people connected to this film and this story, is he the only one the machine left completely alone? Here's the part of the story that changes everything. The 24 minutes that were removed from Eyes Wide Shut after Kubrick's death. The scenes that the studio insisted were cut purely for rating reasons, officially, clinically, a business decision. But people who have studied the original production materials, who have gotten their hands on on-set scripts, who have documented what Kubrick's original structure actually looked like, they tell a very different story.
It's missing a narration. It's missing a third-person narration that was originally in the movie. And that's because the movie was recut and changed after his. And they will deny it. But as a student of Kubrick, I'm watching the movie and I'm like, oh, Kubrick wouldn't do that.
The deleted scenes didn't go deeper into adult content. They went deeper into the children. Kubrick's most haunting message in the film, the scene that most people miss entirely, is the final sequence at the toy store. While Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman's characters are distracted by their own conversation, their daughter Helena wanders through the store aisles, and in the background watching her are 2 men. The same 2 men who were stationed at Ziegler's elite party earlier in the film. This wasn't a background detail. This was Kubrick's entire point compressed into a single terrifying image. He was showing the audience that the targets of these elite circles were never the adult women at the party. The adult women at the party were the access mechanism. The real targets were the youngest, the most vulnerable, the ones society least expects anyone to come for.
You believe that children are being abused by pedophiles in Hollywood.
Absolutely.
So why are you sitting down talking to me? Why aren't you sitting down with the police right now?
I've told the police.
And if the 24 minutes that were removed from that film went even further into that territory, further into the documentation of what these elite circles were ultimately doing with the most vulnerable, then it doesn't matter what studio executive signs off on what rating justification. The reason those scenes were removed is because they showed too much of something that was at the time still happening. Tom Cruise was in those scenes.
He filmed them.
He was present for everything Kubrick constructed. Every metaphor, every hidden symbol, every piece of imagery that Kubrick deliberately layered in to make the message undeniable for anyone willing to look. And when Kubrick died 6 days after delivering his cut, when the studio went into that film with scissors and removed everything that was too revealing, Tom Cruise said nothing. Not then. Not in 2005. Not in 2010. Not when the Epstein story first broke in 2019. Not when Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted in 2021. The silence has been absolute, calculated, sustained across 25 years and every major development in this story.
666 days before January 1st, 2001, the first day of the year of his greatest film. That worries me, I have to tell you. I think that's a signal, and I hope to, the heavens above that he wasn't murdered.
Here's where everything lands in 2026. Stanley Kubrick made the map in 1999. He died before he could tell the world how to read it. His film was altered, blunted, stripped of its most revealing sections, and released into a world that was told to dismiss it as a slow, confusing, overwroughing disappointment. Mel Gibson spent decades being punished for knowing what that map pointed at, and eventually put his own version of it on screen with Sound of Freedom, which grossed over $250 million with zero studio support, while the entire media apparatus tried to bury it. Corey Feldman spent 30 years being called a liar for saying out loud what Kubrick was saying in symbols. Joe Rogan, who attended the party, who was targeted by Epstein's team, who spent years discussing this on his podcast while being attacked for it, is now sitting at the intersection of everything and realizing he was never just a commentator in this story. He was a character in it the whole time. And Tom Cruise, the one man at the center of all of it, who has never paid a single professional price, is the question mark that nobody in mainstream media is willing to ask. Because here's what the Epstein files made undeniable. Every single thing Kubrick put in that movie is confirmed. The parties, the billionaires, the gatekeepers, the international logistics, the blackmail infrastructure, the most vulnerable being targeted by the most powerful. All of it documented, unsealed, verified. Which means Tom Cruise didn't film a work of fiction. He filmed a documentary. And he's been pretending he doesn't know that for 25 years. Joe Rogan, who has never once been afraid to say the uncomfortable thing on his podcast, went genuinely quiet when someone connected these lasts in front of him. Because sometimes the truth lands so precisely that the only honest response is silence. And right now, with everything that's unfolding, Tom Cruise's 25 years of calculated silence is starting to sound exactly like that. The masks are coming off. The people who spent decades making sure nobody looked too closely or running out of places to hide. And the man who stood inside Stanley Kubrick's warning, who was there for every frame, who heard every piece of research, who played the character of the man who stumbled into the darkness and survived, is going to have to answer for his silence eventually. Eyes Wide Shut was never just a movie. It was a confession, and Tom Cruise was standing in the room when it was written. What do you think? Was Cruise's silence protective? Or was it something worse? Drop it in the comments. And if you haven't seen my breakdown of Sound of Freedom and the Kubrick-Gibson connection, watch that next. Subscribe because this story has only just begun.